The God who would save us was coming into Jerusalem. The final week of his life, everything has been building up to this moment, and Jesus knew what was going to transpire through the course of this week as he came into Jerusalem. Matthew records this account for us in his gospel. In chapter 21, it says, "Now when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, 'Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord needs them, and he will send them at once.'" Up to this point, we have seen Jesus at different times, whether it be him healing someone or a miracle happening. He sends people away saying, "Don't tell them who I am." And yet here we find Jesus at the beginning of the last week of his life, as he's getting ready to go into Jerusalem. He tells the disciples when he sends them into the town to find the donkey that he would ride in to fulfill the prophecy about the coming Messiah. He tells them, if anyone asks you why you need this donkey, tell them the Lord has sent you. Matthew tells us this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them. It was to fulfill the prophecy, yet I think the people who were gathering, it tells us that the crowds were gathering and they were waving palm branches and they were laying their cloaks down and they were excited that Jesus was here, the Son of David. But yet I think there was a group of people within that crowd who believed that the Messiah was coming for a different reason. Not to save them from their sins, but to save them from Rome. They had a thought in their mind that this is why Jesus was here. And it tells us in verse 9, "And the crowds that went before him and that followed him were shouting, 'Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest.' And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, 'Who is this?' And the crowd said, 'This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee.'" The crowd was excited. Jesus was here. The Messiah was coming to save them. And yet, Jesus had different emotions in his heart as he was coming into the city because he knew what was to transpire. Luke tells us in chapter 19, verse 41, "And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it." Jesus knew the hearts of the people. He knew that they were excited, but they didn't understand what was going to happen and what was going to transpire through the course of this last week of his life. And he wept over the city. He wept over their sin. And Luke gives us an account of some of that. He tells us in verse 45, "And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, 'It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers.'" Jesus was weeping over the city because of things like this. He said, that temple, that's the house of my Father. This is supposed to be a house of prayer, and yet you've turned it into a den of robbers. And he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him. But they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were hanging on his words. They were hanging on the words of Jesus as he was teaching. And yet Jesus knew in his heart what was going to happen by the end of this week. You see, the sins of the people were many, but yet his mercy was more.